ألم تر كيف ضرب الله مثلا كلمة طيبة كشجرة طيبة أصلها ثابت وفرعها في السماء.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Deeply Rooted podcast. This week's episode is really exciting. It's a very popular topic. It's definitely something that we need to discuss.
Yes.
So today's topic is feminism. So Ijaz, just to start us off, what is feminism?
There is no one necessarily definition of feminism, but there is a range of definitions that we can work with. The general meaning of feminism is that it's an ideology which seeks to have men and women having equal opportunities, generally speaking. Not that they need to do the same things, but rather that they must have the same opportunities that don't discriminate based on sex. So, for example, if you're going for a job like teaching, you shouldn't be discriminated against as a woman so that you're not hired for that position. So this is generally what feminism is, but today's popular definition of feminism is an association of related social issues, something like the LGBTQIA issue. Then you also have the Black Lives Matter issue, the anti-Trump movement. All of these things are inextricably tied to each other, but I think that we should just work with the first meaning, which is that it concerns itself with equal opportunities for men and women. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on this? How do you understand feminism as a Muslim Sister Iman?
So there's lots to say about feminism. I think just first and foremost, before we really dive into this discussion, I think we need to firstly recognize that women's issues are real.
Yes.
I think when a lot of people, discuss feminism, they really undermine the struggles of women, which is not a good thing to do because women do have struggles and their struggles are valid. However, the approach that we take to solve these problems is what's important. So that's just first and foremost.
Mhm.
Now, feminism itself is a Western movement, right? It's initiated by Western, particularly white women, white Jewish and Christian women, because they were heavily oppressed by the church and the synagogue. This is true. This is a historical fact that Christian and Jewish women were oppressed by the church and synagogue. They did not have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to go to get an education. Actually, they would have to, particularly Christian women, would have to pay a dowry to get married to the husband. Actually, it's the opposite of what Islam says, right? And amongst many other things. So feminism in and of itself is definitely stemming uh, from the West. It's a Western movement initiated by Western women for them. And obviously it's changed over time, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak, Ijaz, and just kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but sister, what is your personal definition of feminism? What do you see it as? That word and that ideology.
Oh, okay. So the way that I would define it is particularly as a socio-political ideology, because feminism itself is uh, is a movement that looks to change policy in favor of women within the social sphere, political sphere, and within the private sphere as well, right within the home.
Mhm.
However, it also looks to change society, right? To change the way society thinks about women, feels about women within the same realm, right? So it's kind of a feedback loop, really, where politics affects society and society affects politics. And feminism is a movement that looks to change both of those things in favor of women, to help women, or lighten the load of women, quote unquote. Yeah, so from that perspective, I would definitely say that feminism is a socio-political ideology.
It's very interesting that you characterize feminism in this way because, technically speaking, when you had the suffragette movement, when women were fighting for the right to vote in the early 1900s, we see that this eventually led to, during the first two world wars, you had a lot of men dying. And because a lot of men died, women had to take up jobs in factories and in industrialized countries. They stopped being in the home and they chose to take on professions. And as a result of this, the workforce literally doubled following the two world wars. And as a consequence of that, the role of women in society has changed drastically. Technically, most feminists that I know seem to be really upset when women fulfill traditional roles like being stay-at-home moms. I know on TikTok, subhanallah, there are so many stay-at-home moms posting videos regularly, and they are completely happy. One of the things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to feminism is at some point if you follow the extreme form of it, it seems to almost demean women for having relationships with men, and it becomes an anti-men movement at some level, a hatred for men. Rather, I think that we don't have to reject the entirety of feminism as it's currently understood. I do believe that women should be involved in socio-political spheres, and that women should have the right to lead organizations, to ensure that they're not discriminated against. And at least in Islam, we don't view women as inferior. We don't view them as something to be managed. We view them as humans, as a creation of Allah, and we have certain rights and responsibilities towards each other, the men and the women. So I think when the question of Islam is taken into the perspective of modern feminism, I think Islam actually provides a lot of solutions. Sister Iman, if you would recall during the Me Too movement, which is fairly popular, we learned that men generally in the Western world had seemed to have a recurrence of being inappropriate with women. And now the feminist movement has taken on the idea that men should not touch women, that men should be separate from women, just as we as Muslims believe. What are your thoughts on this, seeing this transformation happen?
Yeah, so subhanallah, it's Islam is the solution for humanity, not just women, but for everybody. And we find that when non-Muslims present solutions or come to conclusions, we find that their solutions that they've found are already in Islam, right? For the most part. Right, so it is actually better for the women to be separate from men to a certain extent. Obviously, there's overlap because we are both a part of a society,
Yes.
but for the most part, men and women are separate. And this is actually just goes to show how natural Islam is. Islam as a deen does not contradict the fitrah of the human being. It actually,
What's the fitra, Sister Iman? What's the
yeah, so
fitra?
the fitra is the natural disposition of the human being, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually created us, and given us these natural inclinations that we have. And obviously between men and women, is some overlap, but there's lots of differences. Yeah, we find that even not just the Me Too movement, but there was even with the past Olympics, there was gymnasts, I believe from Germany, but I could be mistaken which European country specifically. But European gymnasts who were wearing long suits, right? You know, the gymnast
Yes,
bottom
yes.
suits they wear. Instead of wearing a bikini bottom, they were wearing basically
And they were
leggings.
sanctioned against, yeah.
Yes, they were sanctions against, and they were saying that we're doing this to fight against the sexualization of women, right? Obviously, this still is not to the Islamic standard of modesty, but feminism has failed the woman. Feminism heavily promoted nudity and sexual liberties, but we found that in both of these scenarios, that Me Too movement that you mentioned, and also in what I just mentioned in terms of dressing more modestly, anyways. We find that these ideas that they have, or many feminists propagate, that nudity, for example, did not actually help women, right? They did not liberate the women, and unfortunately, it took Western women over 100 years to figure out that it's actually better for women to have clothes on. Unfortunately,
Unfortunately, yep.
yeah. So alhamdulillah, at least they're starting to realize, and modesty is coming back, definitely within the fashion as well. Even myself, I was at shopping the other day, and there's certain stores that are still not modest to the Western standard, I could say, not modest to the Muslim standard, but to the Western standard. There's lots more clothing that's more modest, and modesty is coming back from within their scope, anyways.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that you mentioned this, because now when we're seeing people being very careful about their gender interactions and the way that they dress, this seems to fulfill, like you said, the natural disposition that we would have, the fitra. So at some level, I think that Islam provides solutions that feminists do generally seek, right? So for example, in Islam, women do have opportunities which are not afforded to men. I mean, feminists generally believe that they should be able to earn their own pay, that they should be able to have the right to have certain jobs. But in Islam, while we recognize that women can have certain jobs, we also recognize that the whole point of a family is so that you have children that that you raise, and eventually these children will contribute to the society. And it almost feels like modern feminism is anti-natalist. People don't generally want to have kids. It ruins their body image. It complicates things financially. I think, personally speaking, Islam gives us a paradigm that we should actually accept, and one which I think our non Muslim friends will eventually adopt. Being a mom, being a wife is not something degrading. You're not serving the husband, but you are serving yourself in light of what you believe about God, so that you fulfill certain roles within society. I mean, today, if you think about it seriously, Sister Iman, most people, who work jobs, the family, the mother and the father, the kids are being raised by complete and total strangers. They don't have that one-to-one interaction with their parents anymore. And so once we destroy the family unit, right, and I'm not saying feminists intend for this to happen, but it's a consequence of their anti-natalist beliefs. And so if you rob a country of its ability to procreate and have a functional family unit, eventually that society will become chaotic. And we're beginning to see that today. The trends teach that kids that grow up in a single parent home without a father figure influence tend to become more violent, tend to engage in more risky behaviors. And Islam is saying, guys, the family unit is essential. The mother and the husband work hand in hand. They have rights and roles towards each other. And so I think feminism kind of undermines the family unit as it's practiced and believed in today. What are your thoughts on this, Sister Iman?
100%. Feminism, I don't think it has the intention to, ruin the home, really,
Mhm.
but that is a repercussion of it. That's just reality, right? We cannot continue to speak in wishful thinking to, back up things that we believe in, right? The reality is that there is a huge repercussion of feminist attitudes, right? Lots of women are not having children, or they are having children very late, and they're only having like one or two kids. That's not enough. And actually, we find that Europe, right, and the United States and Canada, they have a very low birth rate,
Mhm.
right, and very high um, uh, uh, demographics, like their age, the not the average, but the median age in Canada is about 44. That's
Wow.
that's very high, very high. It should be around 20. It should
So,
be
so,
around.
so basically, what you're saying is that the average person in Canada is too old, and we don't have a younger generation that will fill the gaps left behind by the older generation.
Yes, but also Canada heavily allows immigration, which is why they're doing that.
Mhm.
That's why Justin Trudeau does that. He allows immigrants because he actually needs immigrants.
For the workforce, right?
For the workforce, but also just to continue the economy. Just to be frank, Europeans particularly don't have enough children. Even in Europe, for example, the birth rate I think is about on average 1.88. That's under the needed amounts, right? To actually maintain a population, you need a birth rate of 2.11, right? Um, in Europe, it's less than that, and most of the babies being born are actually Muslim babies. They're not
SubhanAllah.
non-Muslim.
Yeah,
So
Muhammad is a very popular name in Europe, I hear these days.
yeah, alhamdulillah. But yeah, so that's a problem for Western non-Muslims, particularly white non-Muslims in the West. It's a problem for them because their population is literally dying out. They don't have their
Enough
ideas
kids.
do not sustain they don't sustain society. And this is actually one of the goals of the Sharia, is to actually maintain society, maintain the population, which is why we have our values and our systems from the social system perspective
Mhm.
to actually encourage a healthy society and the prosperity of society and the maintenance of society, right? So this actually is from our perspective, is another proof that Islam is the best law, because it is a divine law, but it is the best system that humanity could use to actually, continue to survive, really. And we are clearly seeing the failure of liberalism from this perspective, because liberals are liberal thinkers, because liberalism is the main ethics of the West, or the most popular one. It's failing society, really.
Well,
And,
Sister Iman, if we think about this, right, the ideology of feminism itself, are we as Muslims opposed to women having rights? Do we think that women should be locked up in a box? Is Islam anti? Is it the antithesis of allowing women to have opportunities that they should have? Does Islam prevent them from living functional lives?
yeah, so no, absolutely not. Muslim women are an essential role in society. Even if you look at many of the Sahabiyat, they were very active in all aspects of life, right? They conducted business within the scope of the Sharia. There's a certain way women conduct business, but you can conduct business and be financially independent. You can definitely actually have the right to an education. That's not really something that's up for debate. You're supposed to be educated. Actually, every single person under a Muslim government or an Islamic government will be educated, inshallah. It's your right. So
But
when we,
are women prevented from like studying or researching or teaching in Islam?
no, women can always do those things.
What
Um,
about the
different,
wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Were they locked up in boxes or did they teach the
no,
believers directly?
they did. And Aisha radiallahu anha is a very prime example. She's the
Yes.
fourth top narrator of hadith. There would be men who actually came from all over the peninsula to come to her and learn from her.
Which
So
peninsula would that be against us,
the
Iman?
Arabian Peninsula, right? Not anywhere in the West, right? That was in the East.
You're talking about 1400 years ago, basically.
1400 years ago, yeah. So when feminism comes along and says, well, we want women to vote, we want women to be able to get an education, to be able to work, to be able to participate in politics, right? Islam already said all of these things. Now I think it's
Yes.
important to differentiate now and kind of dive into Muslim women specifically, because Muslim women know this, right? There's no Muslim woman who doesn't know these things about Islam, and this is actually one of the biggest reasons why most reverts are actually women, right? Because Islam definitely liberates the woman. Um, so what's important to note, though, is that a lot of Muslim women who ascribe to feminism, specifically that group of Muslim women, it's again important to differentiate that a lot of them do not actually accept feminism as an ideology. Unfortunately, they view feminism as just simply fighting for women's rights, and they look at it very superficially. They don't really understand the repercussion of identifying with this group. And inshallah, we can educate that group,
Yes.
inshallah.
Is there an
That
institute where they can learn about these types of things?
Yeah, so the I3 Institute does have the Versatile Muslima brand, right? Where it's a brand by sisters for sisters that offer a lot of resources for sisters. Halaqat, we have conferences, hear me sessions. We also have events, right? So there's lots of opportunity for you to, as a sister, to get to know other sisters, but also learn things that are catered to sisters, like feminism, for example, and women's fiqh and things like that. So those
You know,
opportunities are definitely there.
Sister Iman, you mentioned something that triggered an idea in my mind. Most today we find that feminists want to reject the almost absurd, obsession about beauty and the high standards that are associated with it. So to combat this, they typically wear like dark lipstick, or they might cut their hair really short and dye it bright red or something. They basically, on some level, disfigure themselves in order not to conform to normative standards of what beauty is like in the Western world. But what we see is that Islam teaches something similar color, but it does not allow you to disfigure the way that you look. Rather, it allows you to cover to keep your modesty. So you don't need to cut your hair, Sister Iman, and dye it a red color to not conform. You can simply cover it and still achieve the same goal. And so the goal of feminists, one of the goals at least, is to reject the high standards of beauty that the modern world has developed and believed in for quite some time. Islam has already the solution for this. You don't need to cut your hair and dye it a different color. Wear the hijab. You don't need to burn your bras. You wear you wear a cloak or you wear a dress that covers yourself appropriately. It seems almost as if they're trying to achieve the same goal Islam has, but from a different perspective and one which is not working. A lot of women that shave their heads completely, they're actually fulfilling something that the men generally want. You're making yourself disfigured to reject beauty standards, but you don't have to go that far. Just cover yourself. So it does seem as if Islam does provide solutions like these. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so as a Muslim woman who does wear hijab and does wear
Mashallah.
a jilbab,
Abaya. Okay.
or an abaya, whatever term you choose to use, um, uh, yeah, covering yourself as a woman is definitely the most liberating thing you can do in terms of the aspect of beauty standards.
Are we shaming you to cover yourself, or is it that you are rejecting of your own autonomy, us being able to look at you?
So first and foremost, when it comes to hijab, it is a command from Allah, and as submitters to Allah, we know that whatever He prescribes for us is better for us. But no, this is not, hijab, right? In the covering of the female body is not shaming the female body. It is actually preserving, protecting, valuing, and giving integrity to the woman. There's even, psychological studies done that show that men who look at a woman who is not dressed do not, functioning in their brain, do not perceive her as a human being.
Value. Yeah, they
Right.
look at her as a commodity that can be
Yes, they
used.
don't actually look at her like a human being. So there's that perspective, but also hijab and covering the female body.
Can you repeat that, Sister Iman? Can you repeat what you said in the last 30 seconds? I think there was a connection hiccup there.
Oh, no problem. So I said from this perspective, it's clear that hijab does increase the value of women in society, right? In terms of the eyes of Allah, we are valued, right? Because Allah has put value in us, right?
Yes.
So the hijab and veiling protects women from men from this regard. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, when, draw your cloaks around your body in order to protect yourself from harassment, right? Harassment, by the way, is not sexual assault. Those are two different things, but that's a different conversation. However, veiling also protects women from other women. Women constantly compare ourselves to other women, whether you kind of realize it or not. You're not a woman, so you might not really understand that or experience that or know what that's like. But women do compare themselves all the time because it is a part of our natural disposition to want to be beautiful and to want to be satisfactory or above that, right? And human beings do learn by copying. It's something that is innate in us. We learn by copying other people. So if we see that many people in society look a certain way, and if we don't look that way, we might not feel like we are satisfied with the way we look, and we might not feel like we are satisfied to, the male gaze, which would be our husbands, right?
Yes.
We want to be appreciated and to be enough, right? That's something that a woman desires. So when we cover our bodies, we actually quite literally take ourselves out of that scope of thinking completely, because even if people look at me, they don't see anything to compare. You are literally taking yourself out of the equation. So from this perspective, hijab definitely liberates the woman from the oppressive beauty standards.
No, sister, so you're not being shamed, you're not being forced, and you're covering yourself because you value the way that your body looks, and you want to express the way that your body feels and acts to someone whom you value, which would be your husband. You're not seeking attention from men due to your body. You want them to judge you based on other things like your intelligence, your mannerisms, the way you carry yourself. That's the social currency that you think is more valuable than simply being stared at by men, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bit unfortunate that people think that covering yourself is limiting your self-expression, but rather it is valuing who you are and your own body's image. In the same way that we would have a ring, a diamond ring, you would put it in a really nice case, wouldn't you? And so when men, in Islam consider women, we consider them to be almost like jewels, that these are precious individuals that we must value and care for. And in the same way that they cover themselves, we the Muslim men, we have to necessarily follow one of the commandments from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is to lower our gaze. Right? We're not meant to stare at you guys. So hijab of our eyes is to lower our eyes, whereas the hijab for you is to cover yourself. So we both have to give and take in this scenario, and it's not meant to shame. It's not meant to hide women from participating in society. Women are allowed to do that. But what we're saying is that the interactions between men and women, there's a line between it. And so we both have different roles within society, and we value both men and women. So when feminism says that, the woman should be able to, expose her body in whatever way possible, I find this problematic because it's not liberating. Rather, it is you're doing what men want. We want you, unfortunately, to dress less. We want to look at you. It's only natural men like what they like. So I think the Sharia considers this genuinely, and it teaches us as Muslims that this is not the right way. And like you said, psychological studies have shown that men who look at women in this way, or who have many relationships, or as we would say, one night stands with them, don't view them as good people or as humans. They view them as something to be used and then discarded. And Islam disagrees with this. Sister Iman, if I may ask you, does Islam make you feel as if you are inferior, that you are a subhuman? Are you a commodity in Islam?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I feel like as again, like I haven't actually, worn my hijab my whole life. I'm 25, but I only started wearing hijab when I was 21. So I have faced both sides of the coin. I've experienced and lived them both. Right. So I can tell you from firsthand experience, I think many sisters would agree with me, that the difference is literally black and white. And actually, at the time when I started wearing hijab, I worked in a male-dominated environment. I worked at a gym. So I literally, with my own two eyes, saw the difference the next day. It was very clear that men do treat you very differently when you dress modestly.
Is it good in a good way or a bad way, would you say?
Yeah, in a good way. You feel comfortable. You feel like I don't have to think about what all these people are thinking about me all the time. I'm actually free from that mindset, and I can actually focus on other things. And it's not detrimental to the mental health of the woman either. It becomes very exhausting to feel like, you're not good enough. And we find so many women have depression and anxiety because of their body, and their, societal standards of their body. And also many women, unfortunately, develop eating disorders, or they commit suicide because of beauty standards. So being beautiful, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be beautiful, by the way. It's natural for the woman to want to be beautiful, and there's actually nothing wrong with that. There are ways women can beautify themselves, but within the guise of the Sharia, right? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be beautiful or beautifying yourself. What the Sharia has done, and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed for us, is a way for us to express our desire to beautify ourselves in a healthy way, and in a way that's actually going to allow us to feel content and fulfillment in our life, and to satisfy this desire to beautify in a healthy way, so that we don't fall into these traps, really, that the liberal thinking, I guess in today's context, liberal thinking has really sucked the woman into. Because women today are not en masse are not really happy, right? Again, with liberalism, is a big wave of atheism, and as we discussed a few episodes ago, atheists do have the highest suicide rate, and atheists do have the highest levels of antidepressants as well. So the liberal life, the liberal lifestyle, and the liberal thinking has not actually liberated the woman or the human being in general.
What you're saying here resonates quite a lot with me because one of the saddest things I've ever seen, at least since World War II, is that women who entered the workforce sometimes they delay marriage because they're more interested in their career, and they do have to pay bills, and to live in the society it can be quite expensive. So they start a career, they become committed to it. Next thing you know, they're 40 years old, 45 years old. They can no longer have children and they are unmarried, and now they're a lot more lonely than they were previously. They have that yearning to have a child, baby fever as we call it, but they were unable to do so at this point, and the time has already passed. So one of the difficulties I have here is that if feminism is meant to help women, one of the consequences of it is that it tells women that they should reject their natural inclinations about being mothers, experiencing motherhood, and getting married. So the question I put to you is, do Muslim women need feminism, or is it the case that Islam already provides solutions for most of the problems which feminists do face in today's world?
Yeah, so Islam is a system of life. It encapsulates everything in your life. So if we're going to speak within the guise of the Sharia, we have to look at things holistically. We cannot just pick a aspect of the Sharia and try to stuff it into a Western lifestyle, which is why there's many issues within the Muslim community, because we are trying to live by the Sharia of Allah in a place where the Sharia does not necessarily really
Sister,
kind
what
of,
does the word sharia mean here?
it means the law in a literal sense.
Is it like a body of religious rulings by qualified people?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay,
exactly.
thank you.
Yeah, so what really kind of happens is, for example, you have a Muslim woman who wants to work. Okay, no problem, right? Her husband's fine with it. She wants to work. Cool. She goes to work. And then she, has all of these obligations as a Muslima. And as Muslims in general, men also, we have obligations to the community as well. So we have lots of responsibility. Islam is not a walk in the park. This life is a struggle, and it will be a struggle until the day that we die. Allah has given us responsibilities that we need to try our best to fulfill. So
Yep. I think your answers are appropriate. And just to be clear, I'm not telling you what to say. I'm not sending you notes. These are your own thoughts as a Muslim woman. You wanted to discuss this topic, and I, as a man, I'm not limiting what you say. Would that be accurate, Sister Iman?
no, not at all. I'm speaking from my own head. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Um,
So
but
then, in other words, Muslim men don't control the expression that Muslim women have the right to. So, in that sense, feminists don't really provide a solution because there is no problem in Islam with regards to this specific issue to even begin with. So, I feel as if Islam has endowed the woman, alhamdulillah, with a lot of blessings, roles, and responsibilities. And historically, Muslims have always looked at women as something good. We don't consider them to be inferior, not to consider them to be bad. We don't consider them to be a negative influence in society. Rather, it is that the Quran and the Prophetic Sunnah teaches us that we must love women, that we must respect them, and that we must be gentle towards them. I honestly believe that Islam is a solution to almost all of the problems which feminists present. And I think that if they did study what Islam teaches and about the individual roles and responsibilities of men and women, I think that they'll actually agree with what we teach. So, for example, Sister Iman, if I don't shake your hand, is that offensive to you? Or is it the case, rather, forgetting COVID, that I simply don't want to touch you because I respect your personal autonomy when it comes to your body? Would that be an accurate characterization? Or is it I'm not touching you because, I think you're inferior in some way?
no, you're correct. I would rather not shake men's hands, anyways. So
Well,
there's
what about hugging?
I want to touch men as a woman. Like I don't want to be touched, so it's fine.
but what then about when men and women, who are platonic friends, they hug each other, right? Now, we look down on that, but many people do it. But the thing is, I think, if you're a guy, you know what happens when you hug a woman. It is very inappropriate. So here's the thing, though. Islam is not saying that women should not be touched because they're dirty. Rather, it is both the man and the woman have the responsibility of not physically interacting with each other unless there is a permissible and reasonable case for it, which would be marriage. right? So we respect each other's body until the time of marriage, where there are new roles and new responsibilities. So just to be clear, Sister Iman, Islam does not view you as dirty or inferior. That's correct.
Oh, absolutely not. Even in the and when it comes to these views, like women being inferior and whatever, a lot of them come from the Bible and the tradition of
Unfortunately.
Christians. Unfortunately, they kind of just get imposed on Muslims. But the Adam and Eve, Adam and Islam and Eve, uh, retelling really in the truth of what actually happened in the Quran is actually nothing like the
The Bible's narrative.
of the Bible and in the Torah. Like they're completely it's night and day.
Different.
It's so different. It's like we can talk Ijaz about this comparison the
For
three
hours.
6 hours. We need 6 hours at least minimum. Like 6 hours is being like we won't cover everything. Seriously. So even just to give just to give one example that's relevant to today's topic. In the Bible, they blame Eve for the sin, and God, from their perspective, punishes women with childbirth because of that.
Curses them, yes.
Yeah, in Islam, actually, women's menstruation and birth are actually blessings from God. They are a means for women to gain good deeds. We are not shamed in Islam for these things at all, and women's bleeding is not shamed either. Actually, there's a reconciliation of the Prophet or a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where a young companion, she was like 14, like she was young, right? She had just hit puberty, and she was on a camel, right? So she had actually bled on the camel, and the Prophet ﷺ, saw this, and he did not shame her or anything. He just told her, "Oh, like, did you get menstruation?" She's like, "Yeah," and she was obviously very shy about it. He was like, "Okay, just go wash yourself, right? And then come take some salt and water and clean the camel, and come wash yourself and join everybody else." So he
Beautiful.
actually took this as an opportunity to teach her tahara, which is like purification, right?
Yes.
And how we should clean ourselves. Instead, he did not shame her. He did not make her feel bad about her menstruation or anything like that. So this is one prime example. Childbearing for a woman is a way for her actually to gain good deeds. And a woman who, let's say, she actually passes away during childbirth, she goes to heaven. From our perspective,
Yes.
so women in the functions of the female body are not looked down upon at all. They're actually
No.
blessings from God. And then from the story of Adam alayhi salam and Eve, they were actually equally as sinful in the eyes of God, because men and women, we don't, our sins are not
Well,
graded based.
equally mistaken in the act that they did.
Yeah, equally mistaken. But on top of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, and I believe this is recorded in Surah Taha, Allah actually turns to Adam alayhi salam and tells him, why did you allow this to happen? Like, he actually puts a little bit more blame on Adam, because men from the family unit are leaders of the household. They are actually responsible for their wife and their children and their actions. So
Responsible,
actually,
right? Not to dominate, but they're responsible for the
they are
bills,
responsible.
caretaking, etc. Yes.
So they're responsible. It is a right of the husband to have his leadership followed by his family, right? So from this perspective, it's kind of the opposite in Islam, and I don't want to make this sound like it's a competition between men and women, because it's not. But men in Islam do have more responsibility, because they take the leadership, they take on the leadership role, right? And that's
So,
really.
so
Um,
in this case, Sister Iman, we're not saying just because the man has authority in the household that he can dominate and dictate. He has actually more rules and responsibilities than he would have otherwise have had. One of the things that we need to consider here as Muslims is that, feminists will call this the patriarchy, right? That we're promoting a patriarchal system. But if you
yeah.
think about the way that the world is managed, there is always one person that ends up with more authority that makes decisions which affect the rest of us. So, for example, in a country, you have one person, which is the president. You don't have two. Otherwise, they can negate the rulings of each other. So, what Islam says is yes, discuss issues that you have, yes, reason with each other, and if the husband chooses a certain act for the family that is permissible within the Islamic body of law, then yeah, we find this to be natural. It doesn't mean that we don't accept requests from women. It does not mean that their voices are not heard. It does not mean that we view them as inferior, but rather it is the man just simply takes on more roles and responsibilities because this is what Allah has endowed him with. And it's only natural possible that there would be one leader in any team. Sister Iman, can you have two leaders with equal authority and power and have your team function normally?
No, this would be a contradiction, because one of them will definitely overpower the other one, even if you give them titles. Like, even if you said there's two leaders, in reality, that's not the case. One will dominate over the other one. This is just a contradiction, and it puts the other leader, right, who's not dominating, in a position of anxiety and distress because they feel like their role is not being fulfilled. So it is a contradiction, definitely. But just to kind of bounce off of what you've said, like, yes, men are the leader of the household, but they are not the dictator of the household, right? So, and I use the word leadership purposely because that's what the role is. It is a leadership role. What makes a good leader? A leader is somebody who has good listening skills, who is compassionate, who has empathy, who who gives a lot of sacrifice for the well-being of the people that he is leading.
Yes.
So a real leader is someone who actually has these
Qualities.
Yeah. So you are not, as a husband, fulfilling your role as a husband if you're just going to be like a mini Fir'aun in your house, right? Like, that's not what Islam promotes, right? So, and I think a lot of women, when they hear this, for example, like, they hear that, oh, it's the right of the Muslim, or the right of the Muslim man to be followed by his family. They see this again as a patriarchy. They see this as a means for men to dominate women, but that's actually not the case at all. It's actually his responsibility to listen to his wife and to take her opinion, and to make sure to be considerate to her, and amongst other things as well. But if a husband is ever being abusive in Islam, or for Muslims, she does have the right, the wife, to take him to court and get separation from her husband.
Yes,
so
and protection. Yes.
And protection from the husband. I think what a lot of feminists have an issue with this is because they think probably that Muslim women cannot get a divorce, because in the Christian tradition, women and men cannot get a divorce.
Yes, correct.
They're not allowed. So they kind of, again, it's just a lot of biblical bias and imposing the Bible onto Muslims. But even, like, if a woman is in a situation where the husband is treating her poorly, she can get out of that.
Yes.
She has resources to leave it, right? But the structure of the family is important, right? It's really kind of the foundation of society, and like you mentioned before, it actually keeps the structure and integrity of society. And I think one other thing that I did want to mention is just kind of from the Islamic perspective of feminism, right? Because we spent a lot of time talking about women's issues, right? But I just wanted to touch upon, some of the reasons why a Muslim woman would actually ascribe to feminism, and if that's okay or not. So I think one of the biggest reasons Muslim women ascribe to feminism is because of men and their mistreatment by men. I think that's probably the number one reason. So what I want to make really clear is that we have a lot of people in our community who unfortunately will attack feminism. And don't get me wrong, I think that it should be debated. But they do it in a way that really
degrades women.
Pressure, and puts all the pressure on women too, saying you have to give up feminism. But then as a man, they don't do anything to actually educate brothers on how to treat women properly. So if we as a community want to work on actually moving people away from feminism as an ideology, we need to do better on both sides.
I agree.
Cannot just point the finger at women and say women need to give up feminism, but I'm not going to do anything to change myself. That's not right. You as a Muslim man are actually in a very, very critical position. If you really want to help women move away from feminism, you need to prove that they don't need it. So, right. So it goes both ways. And that's point number one. Number two, another reason why some Muslim women will move towards feminism is because they have a lack of education in the Deen. So inshallah, we need to educate them on that. And some people will say things like the Prophet ﷺ was a feminist, unfortunately, right? So we have to educate them on that's not true. Another thing is actually a lot of people just want to fit in. That is another one. They want to fit in with the West, and they feel like if I don't say Muslims are feminists, then the West is going to think that we hate women, right? That's a big one. So we have to also work on, and which is beyond the scope of this podcast, but we need to work on as a community actually reclaiming the Muslim identity, especially amongst the youth. And I would actually ask any Muslim woman who really, really ascribes to feminism, I would ask them a simple question. I would ask them, can you provide me one evidence, just one, of any prophet, the seerah of any prophet? It doesn't have to be Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the seerah of any prophet. Bring me an evidence when they mixed Islam and a non-Islamic, right?
Ideology.
A man-made socio-political ideology on a pursuit of justice for the people. If they can provide one evidence for this, I would love to see it, because the way we actually work towards justice is very important.
Yes.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a deen, a beautiful deen, but He has also given us a way to actually establish the deen and implement the deen and maintain the deen, and we have to use it. We have to use the process that Allah has prescribed.
Sister Iman, what you said was very beautiful and I think very accurate. As we wrap up here, I have one last question for you, and if we can keep it brief and wrap up, inshallah, I think we've done a great podcast. The question is here: why do you think it is that the ideology of feminism emerged from Western secular democracies? Why didn't it emerge in conservative Islamic societies?
Are you asking particularly a feminist movement?
Why did it begin in the West and not in conservative Muslim countries?
Okay, so because it wasn't needed, that's why.
Yeah. So in the West, there was a definite need for this movement.
There was a need, and you know what? Even if I'm going to speak to a non-Muslim woman, I would say to them, a non-Muslim, I would say that you 100 years ago definitely needed feminism. They definitely needed it. They needed it. As a non-Muslim women needed feminism. But feminism has gone to the point where it's not actually looking really to uplift women. A lot of feminists, to be quite frank, they commit a lot of hypocrisy. If you don't agree with them, you're misogynistic, right? Which is not, I've had people feminists call me misogynistic. Really? And I'm like, well, I'm a woman, right? Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I hate women. Right? Feminism is not this epitome of justice for women. It's not. There's lots of women who did not benefit from feminism, and Muslim women definitely did not benefit from feminism. Feminists never actually included Muslim women. They still don't. Feminists love saying that we wear bags over our bodies. So feminists don't really treat Muslim women well. Obviously, that's not all feminists. I'm not generalizing, but there's lots of feminists that don't treat us well.
There's a trend there you're seeing.
Yes, and I think one of the last things I'll say before we wrap up is that politics plays a very big role in this discussion. George Bush, right, to give just one example, but this example really goes back to the Crusades of the West using Muslim women as a target to belittle us, say that we're oppressed, in order as an excuse to invade our land and kill millions of Muslims and steal our resources. This is a repercussion of the reality of feminism, that it was used by politicians to say Muslim women are oppressed and we have to go liberate them and this and that, and let's just send our whole military into Iraq, where 1.5 million Iraqis died. So we have to also consider that feminism,
has destructive effects as well.
It has killed. Feminism and liberalism have killed millions of Muslims. This is reality. So when a Muslim ascribes to feminism, I very humbly and respectfully tell them that we need to learn history and we need to learn the political effects of this ideology, because they have not been good for us at all.
Indeed. Sister Iman, thank you, Jazakallah khairan, for your beautiful, statements, and it was very well articulated. And I think we covered this topic quite well. Jazakallah khairan for the opportunity, and I guess we'll see the viewers in the next time, inshallah.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.